Welcome to Behind the Campaign, the podcast where marketers pull back the curtain on some of their favorite marketing campaigns. I'm here today with Caroline Kite from Swoogo. She's the marketing manager there. Hello, Caroline.
Hello, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. So, for those of our listeners who are not familiar with Swoogo, tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Sure. So Swoogo is an event management platform. So we help event teams with registration, event marketing, and logistics. And then we connect all of their event data across their event portfolio so they can get a full view of how attendees are engaging, take all that great data, bring it back to their business, and help grow their business.
Yeah, and it seems like post pandemic, we're getting a lot more events, coming out, even more than I think we had before. So your service is much needed right now.
Yeah.
We're talking today about a campaign that you guys did that is really more of a traditional content marketing campaign than a product marketing campaign. So you weren't necessarily pushing your product or your service, but really trying to educate and give people some tools that will help them help their businesses as a whole. Tell us a little bit about the campaign.
Yeah. So the campaign we're talking about today is focused on how event and field marketing teams can take their flagship corporate event or their big customer conference, whatever is their biggest kind of event investment throughout the year of their own hosted event, and then take all that great content and drive value across, from the rest of the year. So whether that looks like campaigns they can build and spin off from that content, or taking it on the road is a really common one that we see with our customers. Well, they'll then do like a 1-day activation in major cities. This is a pretty common strategy that event teams and marketing teams want to work on, and especially large matrix marketing teams, it can be really challenging. I've worked on a lot of them where the event team is heads down on that big flagship, but then how are you connecting the dots back to the rest of your campaign team and your field marketing team? So the theme itself of the campaign is very much not about Swoogo's product and how we can give our audience just great ideas that they can bring back to their teams, whether or not they run their events on Swoogo and whether or not they're even in market for event technology. I think the reason we want to build in that direction is because we know at any given time there's only a small percent of your audience that is in market and wants to have a product conversation. So how can you bring value to everybody else and still build trust in your brand and become a resource to the people that don't want to feel like they're being sold to yet or are going to come to you anyway when they are in market? So, if they are ready for a product conversation, of course we have plenty of content for them and are ready to meet with them, but we just tried to be as specific as possible with this campaign and bring people great ideas that make them better at their jobs. I think as a marketer, that's how I like to be marketed to. So it's fun to be able to, in a role where I get to market to marketers, it's fun to take that approach too.
Yeah, we're constantly, being bombarded with content. But then when we think about our own content and, you have this big event and like you said, you're spending so much time on it. And then a lot of times people are like, okay, now what do we do? So I think that this campaign really helps those individuals who do have those campaigns figure out how they can get more bang for their buck out of that lots of money that they're probably spending on that event. So what were some of the components of this campaign? Because I know you guys did a lot of different stuff.
Yeah, so we built it around an anchor guide or ebook. We call it a guide at Swoogo. So that's sort of a long form 10 ideas to take your flagship event and turn it into something that you can kind of use all year. We tried to be super specific. We tried to not just say why it's a good idea, but also how can you do it, or tips and tricks to break through a barrier. I've worked on a lot of marketing teams that have done various versions of it. So some of that I was just pulling from my own, it's what we're seeing our customers do, but it's also like, what are the challenges that I felt as a marketer on a really big marketing team, and kind of watching over the years as it's a common strategy and challenge. So that guide sort of acted as the main anchor content piece. And then based on that, we distributed it across different channels. Some of them lean more awareness, like social media, advertising, email. Some of them are more lead capture focused, like content syndication, where we can get super granular on who we want to target and the types of accounts that we want to reach. And then while the guide is the kind of main piece of content, we also wanted to build something that was evergreen enough that we could use the topic as a baseline for other engagements across the year if we need. So one thing that we did was hold a virtual roundtable with a vendor called Purple Cork that does virtual wine tasting, kind of VIP style virtual events. And that was great because we got to have a panel of marketing leaders that talks about how they were addressing this challenge and the different things that they were doing to kind of take their flagship on the road or whatever that might look like for them. And then we went into breakout rooms and people were sharing their own strategies. So it didn't feel like a webinar. It felt very much like a discussion, which was great. And then I've also taken that topic and that kind of guide and the content we've gathered and turned it into an executive summary deck, a speaking session abstract, or a webinar abstract, just things we might want to tap into throughout the year to make sure that the campaign can carry on. And it's not something that it's not like a one and done thing where it's now March. We've had some version of the campaign or some channel running with that campaign since we went live with it in October. And I think to do that, you just have to feel really good about the theme being evergreen and the theme being like rich enough that you can keep talking about it and keep getting it in front of people because you're only going to reach a certain percent of your audience with any given channel. So
Yeah.
I think it's not a bad thing to be repetitive if you have a theme that you think is valuable. You just get it in as many places as you can and not be afraid to like extend the campaign for a long time. And, we didn't launch LinkedIn ads right away with it. We did a couple other things with it and then just recently went live with LinkedIn ads. So I think we're getting a lot of value out of the campaign just by stretching it out in that way.
Yeah. The collaboration with Purple Cork sounds interesting. What made you kind of choose them and how did that work?
Yeah, so that I've worked with Purple Cork for at least since COVID hit. So probably 2021 and done kind of a variety of super targeted, more executive style, like small group discussions and things like that. They do I just love how turnkey it is. So as a marketer I'm not an event marketer myself and I'm more of like on the campaign side and wanting to just plug an audience into something and like run with it. I know what I want to bring to the audience and who I want to have there, but I need support on the execution of bringing that to life. And Purple Cork is an awesome way to take your campaign, turn it into it doesn't feel like a webinar, but it's a lot more like discussion centric. So that was something that we worked with since they're also targeting event marketers and campaign managers. We have sort of a similar target audience. So that was actually a really great topic for Purple Cork as well to say, could you take your flagship event and turn it into a series of like virtual engagements through the year? Purple Cork is also a way to do that. So it was a great channel for us to bring the content to life, but it also was cool because we have a bunch of marketers on the call that also could potentially benefit from doing something like that. So there's some fun overlap seeing how the topic itself is relevant, but then as a marketer in that setting, you're also like, okay, how can I use this? Or that's how I started to work with Purple Cork is I attended one and I
Mhm.
wanted to I've been using it ever since.
So this was, something I think that Swoogo didn't necessarily do a lot of before, this content marketing focused campaign versus product marketing. What were some of the challenges that you had when you first started this campaign, or maybe when you presented it to your leaders and said, "Hey, I think we should do this," or during the campaign itself? What were some of the challenges you came up with, and how did you deal with those?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think with nothing super unique to this campaign, but I think whenever you build an integrated campaign like this that you're designing almost to run in the background among all the other things that we as marketers are working on, and things that are more time bound, like an event obviously is like very much there's a sprint of promotion and then it happens and then your follow up and just all the different kind of ways that we all as marketers, there's lots of directions we get pulled in. I think the challenge that I always have with this style of campaign is connecting the dots, staying consistent in the way that we're communicating back to the business, keeping it in front of your audience consistently when you have a bunch of different things that you want to bring to them. I think these evergreen style campaigns that you run always on can be some of the most high performing and most rewarding just because you reach so much of your audience over time. But it's easy to take your foot off the gas and like focus on more short term priorities instead of these longer term almost like drumbeat style campaigns. So that's one area that isn't unique to this campaign. I think is just part of how many of these have I seen or attempted to run where it's like, oh yeah, we meant to do that, but it's not necessarily like it can sort of be a nice to have, but if you can do a really nice job of like keeping it live and keeping it going, the campaigns work really well and you reach a huge group over time. And I think the other thing, which again is probably a common experience across any integrated campaign, is the way you're communicating about it internally with your teams, because showing how all these different channels and tactics over time knit together can be a challenge. Having like a great one slide visual on what is the campaign. There's a bunch of components and channels, but what are we trying to do with it? Who are we trying to reach? How do we want the teams kind of responding when you have the type of campaign where marketing runs with a part of it and then pulls in the sales team for just a part of it? It can start to feel, you want it to feel connected and not like a bunch of one-off tactics. And I think that comes down to the internal enablement around it. And that will just improve your campaign's performance, because my perfect state is that the campaign's like an umbrella and then everything underneath it. For instance, my SDR team could say, okay, we got a content download on the guide. And then we have this related asset that is probably a good fit to follow up with. And that's just something that they, because we've enabled them well, hopefully can just run with and say all these different things and offers fall under the same campaign umbrella. So I know quickly how to respond, how to find relevant content that's related to it. I think that is a really consistent challenge across any campaign like this, where, they have a bunch of different marketing offers that they need to know how to respond to. This one might be running all the time in the background, but knowing, hey, okay, if we're running lead gen or any kind of awareness campaign with this across 6+ months, making sure that your internal teams feel connected to it, feel updated on it, feel like they know why we're doing it. I think that's another area that you have to be purposeful about and not just like that,
Yeah.
hope for the best.
Yeah, I think you bring up such a good point, because when I work with clients who are not used to doing more brand awareness, educational type content, they're very product marketing focused. And I try to introduce the concept of content marketing, and they're like, well, we need to talk about our products. And I tell them, you can still talk about your products. This sits alongside, right? This educational content. Like you said, it kind of needs to weave together, and you need to understand where those points of connection are between that product focus, that sales type content, and this more educational content that I like to say provides value above and beyond the product or the service. And that internal team piece is so important. And I see so many companies that just their teams don't work together. And I think doing this type of campaign can really help that, for the good of the entire company, no matter, if you're still working on this campaign or not. I think having those internal connections being built through this type of campaign can really benefit an organization. So did you see that a little bit when you were, when you started doing this campaign? You talked about your other teams that, you know, had to be enabled. Did that enable the teams in other ways as well?
Yeah, I think it is such a mindset shift too, because Swoogo does such a great job of capturing when someone's in market for event technology. We have so much great content and a great way of capturing that demand. And I think I don't know what the stat is. Everyone knows it takes a certain number of touch points with a lead or with a person for them even to be aware of your brand, let alone ready for a product conversation. So one of the ways that I talk to the team about a campaign like this is that we want our sales team and our SDR team to be able to feel like a resource to the prospects and customers that they're reaching out to. So to have this just like helpful content that isn't a hard ask is a really hopefully refreshing feeling too for them, that they have this whole library of things that they can pull from to just check in with an event leader or a field marketing leader that, they might have connected with last year, and they just want to check in with some valuable content. And it doesn't have that feeling of like, are you ready to meet yet? If we know, I think it's 12 touch points between whatever the number is. I'm sure there's an official stat somewhere about it, but we need that kind of lighter touch, just educational content to help them reach that point, whether it's a marketing touch point or a touch point from the sales team. And another fun thing about it is we're selling to marketers. So they get our world. And I think the more helpful we can be, the more we can show them we get, it's event busy season, or it's like, hey, you just had your flagship event. This might be helpful as you think about how you want to use that content through the rest of the year. That's a great way to just have people think of us as a resource. I think
Mhm.
as long as we can associate our brand with events and enterprise marketing, and we're connecting the dots for them without having to be so literal that, hey, we sell event technology and can help you run programs like this. Anybody that's in market and looking will be able to find that out anyway. So filling out the top of the funnel is a really, I think, beneficial. It can be hard to measure the direct impact in the same way, but I
Yeah.
think it's just a natural, it'll help, it lifts all the other channels when you
Yeah.
approach.
Yeah, I agree, and that measurement piece is always a challenge when you're dealing with this type of content, and leaders wanna see numbers, right? They wanna see the hard data about how did this perform, and sometimes that can be a challenge, but, there's a lot of things that go into it, whether it be how your technology is connected in the background to connect all of those touch points or, how well your sales team does at connecting those touch points. I gave this lead this guide and, 2 months later they came back and signed with us or whatever. So that measurement piece can be difficult. So measurement aside, what kinds of results have you seen from this? Have you had good reaction from your audience? And how did that come about?
Yeah. So in terms of the way, I've been really happy with the kind of types of accounts and the types of titles, VP director level titles that have shown interest in the content. So for my own kind of like measurement of if this is landing with the audience, I feel really good about that. And then the most direct feedback that we got from our audience on this was around that virtual roundtable. So it was a great reception around like, this is something we're all focused on. And if we're not, we should be. So I wasn't surprised by the reception to the topic because I have worked in a lot of large marketing teams that are faced with a lot of pressure to either maximize the investment they're making in that flagship event, but also under a lot of pressure to make sure they're connecting the dots across different teams. Because when you work in a big marketing team, you can be on an island a little bit and not really know what's happening across the business. So I think this topic in particular, we essentially positioned it as your flagship event is your best mechanism to connect the dots across those different silos. So I think that landed really well when we had that kind of, it was about, I want to say 30-ish to 40 across events, marketing ops, revenue marketing, demand gen. It was a really broad kind of scope of people that were on that call and all resonated with different parts of that. I think, I'm not an event marketer myself, but then across my career, the flagship event of wherever I've worked has always been a huge effort or like connection point for different things that I might be doing on the campaign side or account-based marketing side. So I know how important the event strategy is to marketers that rely on the content that comes out of that event. I think I personally felt a good connection to that topic, and I was happy to see that the kind of the rest of our audience that we were trying to reach with that also feels the same way. And there's always, it's a great topic that you see, you see another organization do something like taking their own event on the road. How can you do that yourself? So yeah, it was a good reception to the topic and helped kind of help us know that this is a topic that we can stretch over time and reach more people with.
Yeah, so your audience received it well, it sounds like, internally received well as well, or,
Yeah.
is this something that you're gonna continue?
Yes. Part of the fun of marketing to marketers, as I mentioned, is we get to put our own best practices to work and speak our own language, sort of. So at Swoogo, we have our customer conference in November. And then starting this month, actually, we're doing a series of roadshows with one of the most popular workshops from that event. So it's fun to be able to put a campaign out as a marketing team, but then also we're sort of our own case study for the topic in general. So we can highlight our customers that are doing it, but then how can we at Swoogo also show like, this is how you do it. So I'm really excited to see how that goes. And there's all kinds of ways that we're taking there's great customer content from who was up on stage for our own conference. How can we take that and get more reach beyond who's in the room? So we're trying to not just put out the campaign about best practices around this, but also do it ourselves and like take our own advice kind of thing about how we take all that great content. You spend so much time trying to gather that content, prep the speakers, find the speakers, and then the event happens. how are you going to, maximize the value of that and bring the learnings from that to even more people? So I'm excited to see how those roadshows go and just what else can we do? It was such a great event and so much great work went into it from our own event team. So as the sort of campaign side of it, I want to maximize that through the year. And most of it's all evergreen content that can feed a year's worth of campaigns too.
Yeah, it's very meta, right?
It
You're
is.
showing people how to do something, you're doing it yourself internally, and yeah, it kinda goes around and around.
Yeah.
As someone who is a speaker, I speak at many events, and I think CMI, Content Marketing Institute, does a really good job of kind of what you're talking about, extending their flagship event. They do articles about the topics that were discussed and quote the speakers and things like that. How do you, as Swoogo, but also how during this campaign do you advise people how to, maybe work with some of the speakers that they have at their events or utilize the content that the speakers are talking about in more ways throughout the year?
That's a good question. I think there's two sides to it. One of the ideas we had in the guide was actually to say to maybe you hire a big, you know, an expensive keynote speaker. Is there a way, and I've never seen this done before, but it was just something we were thinking about could be cool. But when you're contracting with that keynote speaker, is there cool like local activations around the city they live in, or if they travel a lot to speak, could you do a happy hour with them and almost 6 months after the event, bring together some of your customers or prospects with that same topic that they might have talked about at the keynote? Is there cool things you could weave into that initial contract to almost take the moment of them being on stage with you and then bring that to, out into the field a little bit? That was one thing that we added into the guide as an idea. And then the other with in terms of customer speakers or like industry speakers, one way to do it is bundle up the ask with, it's like, hey, you'll be on stage. Do you also want to do a Q&A on our blog? Do you want to do we'll come to your city and do a happy hour and you can co-host and do a panel with us. Maybe package up the ask so that one, make it easy for them to say yes, but also it's probably things that they'd be excited to do. And it'll feel like you're asking once and for sort of a menu of things or package of things that you're getting more out of the content, but then they also can kind of plan ahead and, become a great advocate or great speaker aligned with your brand over time. But just thinking ahead to like, okay, if we get this great content, in our case, November, is there more we could do with them? Maybe like, is there sort of a menu of almost like a customer reference menu that you can bring to them and see what would they be interested in? What would their organization be open to them doing? 'Cause sometimes different
Mhm.
formats of references are possible, maybe not a long form case study about how they're using your product, but could they speak about just industry best practices, how they're approaching different strategies? And maybe that's an easier way to get a big brand that sometimes there's rules about what they can or can't talk
Yeah.
about.
Gotta abide by those rules and the contract terms and all of that stuff. So hindsight is always 2020. If you were to start this campaign all over again, would there be something you'd do different, or do you think it kind of came out the way that you envisioned it?
I think I would put real life customer slash not even just necessarily customer examples, but I think I would take the guide and put more real examples into it. We got to highlight real examples through the panel that we did with marketers talking about how they're doing this, but that was kind of an invite only. We did have a blog recap after the fact, but that reached a more limited audience than the guide would. So I think instead of Swoogo is telling you to do this, it still wasn't about Swoogo. It wasn't about our product at all, but it was still like, here's a list of things you can take and do, all built on real examples out in the world. But I think that was one thing that I would do differently is put actual examples more, like almost lead with that more. I'm sure we have some peppered in there, but that was one thing that thinking back, I think I would do, or even just like quotes from event marketers that were doing one of those 10 things and like pop that in. And I think that's something that I would do is just weave in recommendations, quotes straight from event teams and field marketers that we work with today.
Do you have is there a favorite part of yours of this campaign? And what do you think was maybe the most successful part of the campaign? I know it's still ongoing, but as
Yeah,
of now.
I think the roundtable was great because it made it feel like come to life. I think that was great. And it is really fun to be part of that conversation when you're sort of the target market yourself. Like, I think as like personally, that's really satisfying for me as a marketer to be running campaigns like this that feel like I can speak to in a different way than maybe I would have in the past marketing to cybersecurity or to, you know, supply chain professionals. So personally, I think that is a really just fun part of this campaign for me. I would say that hearing the energy around the topic from marketers, that's what made it feel like that made me believe even more in the content in the guide or in the need to invest more in getting the guide out there more is just that it feels like a topic that it's a challenge people share. And it's fun to be able to help give them ideas and address that. I think the best marketing doesn't feel so much like marketing, it feels more, here's some really specific cool things you can do. And I think we did a good job with that, of just being as specific as possible. We weren't preaching about the importance of doing it. We were just saying, okay, we know you're already trying to do this. Here's how you can do it. I think we nailed it when it came to that. And that's really satisfying. But yeah, it's still continuing on. We're still doing advertising around it. I would like to revisit, like, do we do a broader webinar around it? Do we turn it into a conference session that we take on the road or do at our own conference? I think there's more we can do with the topic.
Yeah, we are all being asked to do more with less, right? More content. And obviously, AI is a big part of, I think, what companies are leaning into to do that. But there are still a lot of things that we as marketers need to take the reins of. And I think this is one of those, being able to kind of figure out how do we extend the life of some of these big pieces, whether it be the big guide that you guys have put together or a big flagship event. How do you get more out of that those things that you can use going forward? So I think that's great. Well, thank you so much, Caroline. I appreciate your time today, and we will keep our eyes peeled for more of this great content from Swoogo about how you can use your flagship event in more ways throughout the year.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.